What do you think about, he mentions Ukraine. What do you remember the whole Ukraine gate fiasco impeachment? Donald Trump quid pro quo.
Yep, I do remember that. Yeah, what about it?
What are your thoughts?
Am I allowed to say the F word?
Yeah, after 15 seconds, yeah.
I mean, we try to keep it family friendly.
In the first 15 seconds, they demonetize.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I'm okay with that impeachment, if that's what you're asking. Yeah.
You think Trump committed a crime with?
Absolutely.
You want to elaborate? I know it might be. It's been a long time.
It's been a while, but my understanding was that Trump contacted Ukraine, Zelensky, and he was asking if there was wrongdoing done by, I think it was by Biden in finding that prosecutor, and if they had any information about potential wrongdoings that Hunter Biden or Joe Biden had been involved in Ukraine. And in exchange for that, he wanted to withhold aid that was already congressionally approved to Ukraine for that.
So what's wrong with that? Like, why is that a problem?
Legally or morally, or
both, either, whatever you think.
Legally, I believe it's because I don't think the president has the authority to withhold that aid. I don't remember what the legal arguments for on that. For the moral part is our president probably shouldn't be asking other countries to investigate like wrongdoings of political opponents. That's a really scary
But Joe Biden
world.
wasn't running for office at the time.
I mean, then why was he? Hold on. I'm trying to think of the timeline for this.
Yeah, Joe Biden, it was a year before he announced. That was part of the controversy, that Joe Biden had not announced he was running for office at all.
No, but hold on. He might not have announced it, but like, I'm pretty sure most people knew he was running. Like in the early polls, like if you looked at Real Clear Progress, if you looked at a lot of the polling aggregate sites, like they were already polling Biden. He'd already been factored in quite a while. He might have announced that he was going to run for office, but I'm pretty sure a lot of people were expecting it.
I mean, that's just speculative media stuff. So Trump isn't actively investigating a political opponent, unless the argument is we all secretly knew that was going to be the case. They were like Bernie Sanders was still in the race. There were a bunch of other people. At the time, the controversy was like, why Joe Biden? There were other Democrats that were actually talking about running, and it wasn't Joe Biden. He announced late.
He did announce late, but he was still factored into the polls really early because like a lot of people thought he was going to run. The question is, though, do we want the president contacting other, even if he's not running, he is still a type of political opponent.
What if the vice president
right?
did the same thing? Is that
if the vice president was? I think that anytime you're reaching out, like let's ask, if we pull back on a macro level, why is Trump asking this information? Does he genuinely think that there's been some grave wrongdoing done by the Bidens that needs to be corrected for?
Yeah.
And if so, why isn't he asking our intelligence agencies for information about this? Why is he going to another country and asking?
I mean, we have the Five Eyes Spy Club. We do that all the time.
It's where we don't do that all the time. Going to another leader and saying, "Hey, I need you to get dirt on a potential political opponent because I think there's something."
Well, he wasn't a political opponent, and
he is a political. Even if he was the vice president of the former opposite party guy that he just as he came into office. What do you mean? He's some kind of political opponent, right? I mean, even if he wasn't directly running yet, like I would argue, if he was asking this for like AOC, for instance, I would say that it's similar.
Trump didn't go to the president of Ukraine and say, "I got this political opponent I need dirt on." He said, "What's up with this video of Joe Biden threatening to withhold congressionally approved aid unless you take action on his behalf?" And the president of Ukraine was like, "I'm not sure." And he goes, "Well, can you look into that? I want to know what that's about."
It wasn't just, can you look into that? It was, if you don't find what I need, I might withhold aid that's already been congressionally approved for you. And that was the issue. If he was just asking questions, we wouldn't be having the conversation. He would have been impeached, right?
So this is the point that I'm getting at. Mm-hmm. When this started and Donald Trump asked about this, specifically because there was a viral video of Joe Biden outright admitting to threatening to withhold congressionally approved aid unless a prosecutor got fired, you had Joe Biden breaking the law.
Sure. So there was a video of Joe Biden on stage making the claim/joke on stage where he's saying, "I told him if you don't do it, you're not going to blah, 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 blah." Joke. But in terms of him, but in terms of there actually being a serious offer on the table where he was like threatening to withhold aid, I'm not even sure if that was ever the case. We have that one statement that he was made publicly. Number one,
signed a sworn affidavit that it's what happened.
Sure. Number one. Number two, the impetus for Shokin being removed from Ukraine was not to get some kind of political dirt on an opponent. It was a completely different scenario. This is a prosecutor that all of Europe and over half of Ukraine wanted fired, that the United States was acting on behalf of the Western world and trying to pressure this prosecutor out because of his lack of prosecuting corruption in the country. That's a totally different thing than I threatened to withhold aid from this guy because he's not giving me dirt on potential political opponents.
So why is it that the guy who was being investigated, Mykola Zlochevsky, returned to the country? He had fled when Shokin was investigating him. And then after Joe Biden got Shokin removed, Zlochevsky returned to the country to begin working on Burisma again.
why did he return to the country?
Well,
it could have been for any number of reasons. I'm not sure.
Right. So the argument from the Democrats, the specific corruption that wasn't being prosecuted you're referring to is the prosecution of Mykola Zlochevsky, the founder of Burisma.
Okay.
And the argument they made was he wasn't investigating him. That was the problem. And then Joe Biden says, and we got him out, and then they put in someone solid. The only issue is when Shokin had about a dozen active investigations into Burisma and Zlochevsky fled the country. They froze his account. When Biden came in and got the prosecutor fired, Zlochevsky safely returned to Ukraine without fear of criminal prosecution. When Donald Trump made that phone call, Zlochevsky fled again. So it sounds more like, you've got Hunter Biden on the board of Burisma, you got a former CIA director on the board of Burisma, and Zlochevsky, the founder. And Shokin had 12 different around 12 to 14.
All of the investigations into Burisma were dead.
No, they weren't. That's not true.
It was
wrong.
Absolutely true.
Completely
they
false.
were only revived 1 month before Shokin was forced out. Every single one of those probes was completely dead.
That's wrong.
You can Google it and look for it if you want.
So I'm citing Matt Taibbi.
God.
Right, and if you don't want to trust a journalist or whatever,
or like any actual article, not a tweet, like any.
I'm not talking about a tweet. I'm talking about an article that he wrote breaking down what happened with Ukraine and his investigation into Zlochevsky, and this is from like 2018.
Okay, so your claim is that the probes into Burisma never went cold and never died; that they were active the entire time.
They were active the entire time. Right.
Okay. My understanding is that those probes were all cold and all dead, and it was part of the reason
hold on. You
why
said dead before. Now you're saying cold.
It's the same thing. They weren't being actively worked on. So there were probes, but nobody was doing anything with them until it was 1 month before Shokin was actually ousted that there was some progress started to be made on those.
So that's a very difficult question to get into. The fact is there were active investigations.
Well, but that's kind of the meat of what we're talking about, right?
Well, so
it's kind of important to settle the fact of the matter on that. Yeah.
Were there 12 investigations? Yes or no?
I know that there were investigations open for a couple of years, but my understanding is they were open. Matters. It's not all that matters. They were dead investigations. There wasn't any progress being made on it. That's what I read that was reported.
Right. My point is this.
But that's pretty important because if they were being actively investigated, then that obviously changes a little bit the story that we're telling, right?
So did Shokin have investigations into Burisma and Zlochevsky? Yes. He had about a dozen.
But whether or not investigation is live or dead, isn't that important? You don't think so?
Did Zlochevsky flee the country while these were on the books? Yes, he did.
I'm not
when
sure.
When Shokin was removed and the investigations were officially stricken, Zlochevsky returns.
So do you think that there are criminal wrongdoings that he's done that he's not being prosecuted for?
What I think is that the United States is in an energy crisis, in a war with Eastern powers. The United States has been trying to get a pipeline for natural gas called the Qatar-Turkey pipeline into Europe, but Syria said no. Syria destabilizes for whatever reason. We want to run that pipeline through Syria, through Turkey, into Europe to offset the Gazprom gas monopoly. Russia runs natural gas into Europe through Ukraine, through Gazprom. It's about 20%. It's massively powerful for them and it allows them to control prices. The United States has interests in setting up an energy company to offset that monopoly, hence Burisma. Hunter Biden's on the board, probably for these reasons. A former CIA director, probably for these reasons.
Wasn't Burisma one of the smaller gas companies in that country?
Absolutely. And it seems like the U.S. was trying to compete with Russia to get cheaper gas to Europe. And the argument made was that Europe was constrained by high gas prices from Russia and that we wanted the European economy to be bolstered and grow faster to compete with China, but Russia was basically keeping us pinned down.